My name is Catherine Marlowe. I'm 32 years old, and I spend my days staring at financial models that most people, especially my family, would call soul-crushing. They aren't wrong exactly, but those spreadsheets, those cold, hard numbers, are the reason I am now sitting in a leather chair that cost more than my first car, holding a document that represents my family's entire universe. It's their proposal, bound in dark green leather and embossed with gold leaf, for the residency at the newly restored Majestic Theater. The Marlowe Players, they call themselves, as if invoking the ghost of a genius could excuse a lifetime of their own particular brand of madness. The proposal is passionate, poetic, and filled with a desperate, hungry hope. They poured every last drop of their artistic souls onto these pages, begging for a chance to claim their destiny. They have absolutely no idea that they are begging me. They have no idea that the anonymous benefactor they've been praising in the local papers, the mysterious savior of the arts they've been weaving fantasies about, is the daughter they disowned for the crime of choosing profit and loss statements over prose and performance. Before I dive into the story of how I ended up with my family's future in my hands, a story of ambition, betrayal, and the quiet, satisfying click of a vault door closing on the past, I'd love to know where you're all watching from today. Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever felt like the black sheep, the one who just didn't fit the mold your family tried to force you into, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps to know you're not alone. And if you're new here, consider subscribing. This is a place where we understand that sometimes the most dramatic stories don't happen on a stage, but in the quiet, tense rooms of our own homes. My family are theater people. I don't mean they enjoy a good musical now and then. I mean they are theater people, a species unto themselves. Life in the Marlowe house was a perpetual state of rehearsal. Emotions weren't just felt, they were projected to the back row. Breakfast wasn't a meal. It was a scene study in domestic ennui. My father, Arthur Marlowe, was the patriarch and self-appointed director of our lives. He was a man with a booming voice that could make the silverware tremble, a man who spoke in dramatic monologues and saw the world as his personal stage. My mother, Eleonora, was his leading lady, a woman of ethereal beauty and a talent for expressing disappointment with a silence more damning than any shout. And then there was my older brother, Leo, the golden child, the prodigy. He had the cheekbones, the smoldering gaze, and a natural charisma that made him the star of every school play, every community theater production, and every family gathering. And I was Catherine, the stage manager, the one who made sure the props were in place, the cues were ready, and the books were balanced for the high school drama club. I was practical, organized, and quiet. In a family of peacocks, I was a wren. They loved me, I suppose, in the way one loves a reliable piece of furniture. I was useful, but I was never, ever the art. The dream, the one that fueled every dinner table monologue from my father, was the Majestic Theater. It stood downtown like a magnificent, decaying queen, a Gilded Age masterpiece of velvet and plaster cherubs, shuttered since the 70s. For Arthur, it was more than a building. It was a symbol of a purer, more noble time for the arts. He would drive us there on Sundays, the car smelling of old scripts and his pipe tobacco, and we'd stand on the sidewalk, looking up at the boarded-up windows and the faded marquee. One day, he would say, his voice resonating with a preacher's fervor, we will bring her back. We will fill this sacred space with truth and beauty again. The Marlowe Players will light up this stage. It was his Camelot, and we were his knights, destined to reclaim it. The schism, when it came, was not a dramatic, third-act explosion. It was a quiet, devastating scene over a pot roast. I was 18. I had spent my entire high school career being the perfect, supportive daughter and sister. I ran fundraisers that bought new lighting rigs, I balanced budgets that allowed for more ambitious set designs, and I sat in the front row of every single one of Leo's performances, my applause always the loudest. They assumed my path was set, a prestigious acting conservatory, followed by a life dedicated to the craft. They had my application to Juilliard filled out before I'd even seen it. That evening, I placed a different envelope on the polished mahogany table. It was thick and bore the crest of a university known for its formidable economics program. I got the scholarship, I announced, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. A full ride. My father picked it up as if it were contaminated. He read the letter, his brow furrowing. Economics? He said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. What is this? It's my passion. I tried, the word sounding flimsy and ridiculous in that room. I'm good with numbers, with systems. I find it fascinating. Arthur looked at me, and for the first time, I I saw not a director looking at his cast, but a stranger. A numbers cruncher? A soulless little banker? After everything we have given you? The art, the beauty, the poetry we have poured into your soul? You want to trade that for a spreadsheet? Eleonora's quiet disappointment was a blade. We thought you were one of us, Catherine, she whispered, not looking at me. We truly thought you understood what matters. Leo, ever the star, tried to smooth it over with the condescending pity that was his specialty. He reached across the table and patted my hand. It's fine, Cat. Really. It's important work, I'm sure. And besides, he added with a charming, dismissive smile, someone has to be in the audience. That was the moment they disowned me. Not legally, not with slammed doors and packed bags. They disowned my soul. From that day on, I was the outsider, the sellout, the cautionary tale of a life wasted on practicality. I went to college. I excelled. I went to Wall Street. I worked punishing hours, surrounded by people who spoke my language, the language of growth, of assets, of strategic acquisition. I built a life for myself, a successful one, a wealthy one. But every phone call home was a reminder of my transgression. They would speak of auditions, of artistic struggle, of the purity of their poverty, and then, in the same breath, ask if I could help with a bill, a loan for a new set, a little something to tide them over. I was their ATM, a necessary but distasteful part of their world. I was the embodiment of the very system they claimed to despise, yet they were never too proud to take its money. And all the while, the ghost of the majestic theater loomed between us, the dream I had so selfishly abandoned. I just never imagined that one day, I would be the one to buy it. The decision to buy the Majestic wasn't born from a single moment of anger, but from a slow, simmering resentment that had cooked for over a decade. It was the culmination of 1,000 small cuts. The forgotten birthdays because Leo had a callback, the condescending questions about my little job, the way their eyes would glaze over the second I tried to share a professional triumph. The final catalyst was a phone call on my 30th birthday. I had just closed a deal that had made my firm, and me, an obscene amount of money. I was sitting in my sterile, minimalist apartment, a glass of expensive champagne in my hand, feeling the hollow echo of my own success. I called home hoping for, I don't know what, a moment of connection, perhaps. My father answered, Catherine, we're in the middle of a read-through. Is it important? It's my birthday, Dad, I said, my voice quiet. A pause. I could hear him snap his fingers. Right. The 30th. Milestone. Listen, darling, can I call you back? Leo is just getting to the soliloquy in Act 2, and he's electric. Before I could answer, he'd hung up. I sat there in the silence, the champagne tasting flat. It was then that the idea, a wild, audacious seed, began to sprout. What if I could use their world to finally make them see mine? What if I could use the language they understood, grand gestures, dramatic reveals, to hold a mirror up to them? A week later, I was in a meeting with my lawyer and oldest friend, Marcus. Marcus was the opposite of my family, calm, logical, and brutally honest. He'd seen me through my scholarship applications, my first terrifying internship, and more than one family-induced breakdown. I laid the plan out for him. I wanted to form a shell corporation, a blind trust, something utterly untraceable back to me. Through it, I would purchase the Majestic Theater. Then I would create a foundation, also anonymous, to fund its complete restoration. Finally, the foundation would announce a competition, offering a fully funded, 5-year residency to one deserving local theater company. Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Catherine, he said, his voice laced with the gentle concern of someone who had known me forever. This is an $18 million project. Are you sure about this? This is a lot of money and a staggering amount of effort just to, what, exactly? Prove a point to your family? It's not just about proving a point, I insisted, though we both knew that was a large part of it. It's about seeing. I need to see what they're really made of, away from me, away from their assumptions. And it's for the city, too. And for my grandmother. My grandmother Althea was my mother's mother, a woman who had been a quiet port in the storm of my childhood. She wasn't a theater person. She'd been a librarian. She loved stories, but she also loved order. She was the only one who had been proud of my scholarship. There's poetry in numbers too, my girl, she'd told me, pressing $100 bill into my hand before I left for college. Don't let them tell you otherwise. She had passed away 5 years ago, leaving me a small inheritance that I had, of course, invested wisely. It felt right to name the foundation after her. The Althea Foundation. It sounded respectable, philanthropic, and completely anonymous. So we did it. Marcus handled the labyrinthine legalities, setting up the corporation and the foundation with impeccable firewalls. I never once put my name on a document. The purchase of the Majestic went through smoothly, an anonymous LLC acquiring a piece of forgotten history. The news hit the city's small, insular arts scene like a lightning bolt. "Mysterious benefactor saves the Majestic," the headline screamed. I imagined the scene in my family's cluttered, bohemian living room. My father reading the paper, his eyes wide with a religious zeal. My mother, hand to her chest, whispering about fate. Leo, already seeing his name on the restored marquee. My imagination wasn't far off. I was scrolling through the local arts blog a week later, a grimly satisfying ritual I'd developed, when I saw it. An interview with Arthur Marlowe. "This is a miracle," he declared to the reporter, his voice practically vibrating off the webpage. "It is a sign from the universe that true, uncompromised art still has a place in this world. The Marlowe players were born for this moment. It is our destiny." The phone rang that afternoon. It was Leo. There was no preamble, no "how are you?" He launched straight into it, his voice high with excitement. "Kat, did you see the news? The Majestic. Someone bought it, some rich angel, and they're giving it away. Well, not giving it away, but a residency. It's perfect for us. Dad is already outlining our first season." "Wow, Leo, that's amazing," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "What a great opportunity for you all." "It is," he said. Then the inevitable pivot. "Listen, things are going to be a bit tight while we pull together the most spectacular proposal this city has ever seen. We want to get it professionally bound, maybe hire a graphic designer. I was wondering if you could, float us a small loan? Think of it as an investment in the future of the arts." I felt the old, familiar sting. An investment. He didn't see me as a sister, but as a venture capitalist for his dreams. "I'm a little tied up right now, Leo," I said, the understatement of the century. "But I'm sure you'll figure it out." I could hear his disappointment through the phone. It was a small, petty victory, but it felt good. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to them. I was in control. 2 weeks later, the Althea Foundation, with Marcus as its public-facing director, released the application guidelines for the Majestic residency. And I had made sure they were rigorous. I wasn't just looking for artistic vision. That was my family's home turf. The application demanded a detailed 5-year business plan, a projection of revenue streams, including ticket sales, concessions, and merchandise, a comprehensive community outreach strategy with specific, measurable goals, an educational partnership program with local schools, and a meticulously itemized budget proposal that had to account for everything from actors' salaries to the cost of toilet paper. I was asking them to speak my language. I was asking them to enter my world. The fallout was immediate. The phone rang again. It was Leo, but his voice was no longer buoyant. It was tight with stress and frustration. "Kat, this application is a nightmare. It's insulting. Itemize your projected marketing spend for Q3 of year 2? What in God's name does that even mean? We're artists, not accountants. Dad says it's a Philistine document designed to crush the creative spirit." My heart gave a little thump. This was it. The first test. "It sounds like a standard grant application, Leo," I said calmly. "Standard for who?" "For soulless corporations," he shot back. Then his voice changed, becoming pleading. "Look, you do this stuff. You understand this garbage. Could you just take a look at it for us? Glance over the numbers? Tell us if we're in the right ballpark." This was the moment of temptation. I could dive in, fix their numbers, ghostwrite their business plan, and hand them a perfect proposal. It would almost guarantee they'd win the residency that I was offering. But it would defeat the entire purpose. They would get their dream, and they would have learned nothing. They would have used me, the daughter they disdained, to get it, confirming their belief that my skills were merely a tool, a service to be employed in the pursuit of their higher calling. "I'm really swamped, Leo," I said, the lie smooth on my tongue. "But a piece of advice, just make sure your projections are realistic. Don't promise the moon if you can only afford a street lamp. And double-check all your math. Foundations hate bad math." He grumbled something and hung up. I leaned back in my chair, my pulse racing. This was harder than I thought. A part of me, a small, stupid 18-year-old part, desperately wanted to help them. It wanted to prove its worth. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was 16, and for the high school's production of Our Town, I hadn't been cast. Not even as an extra. My father, who was advising the drama teacher, had suggested I'd be more valuable backstage. So they put me in charge of the budget and fundraising. Leo, of course, was playing the stage manager, the lead role. I threw myself into the task with a quiet ferocity. I organized a bake sale, a car wash, and a benefit concert. I cold-called local businesses and secured sponsorships. By the end of it, I had raised more money than the drama club had seen in a decade. We bought a new professional-grade lighting board. On opening night, the stage was bathed in a warm, beautiful glow that made the cheap sets look magical. After the show, my family was mobbing Leo, telling him how brilliant, how moving he was. I stood to the side, holding the final reconciled budget sheet in my hand, a small, proud smile on my face. My father finally noticed me. He glanced at the paper I was holding. "Ah, yes. The money. Good job, Catherine." "That's very nice," he said, giving my shoulder a perfunctory pat. Then he turned back to the crowd. "But the real magic, the real work happens on the stage, doesn't it? Not on a spreadsheet." He'd said it with a grand, inclusive sweep of his arm, and everyone had nodded in agreement. I had never felt so small, or so invisible. The new lights he was basking in? They were my magic. He just couldn't see it. A knock on my office door snapped me back to the present. It was Marcus, holding a stack of pristine, bound documents. "The first round of proposals," he announced, setting them on my desk. "And you're not going to like it." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He tapped the top proposal. The cover read, "The Downtown Repertory Theater." The Downtown Rep has a very, very solid plan, Catherine. They've been around for 20 years, they have a dedicated following, and their financials are immaculate. They've got the outreach, the educational arm, the 5-year plan. It's everything you asked for. They are, on paper, the perfect candidate. I stared at the proposal. A new, unexpected feeling washed over me. It wasn't jealousy or anger. It was fear. What if my family's proposal, when it finally arrived, was just bad? What if it was so amateurish, so filled with arrogant nonsense, that it couldn't even be considered a serious contender? I had built this elaborate stage, this perfect test, assuming they would at least be able to deliver a performance. What if they couldn't even make it to their cue? What would that say about them? And more importantly, what would that mean for me, and for this strange, vengeful, and secretly hopeful project I had undertaken? The thought that they might fail so completely was, to my absolute horror, almost as painful as the thought of them succeeding without ever understanding why. The Marlowe players' proposal arrived by special messenger on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't in a simple manila envelope like the others. It was delivered in a custom-made black portfolio box, tied with a grosgrain ribbon. The sheer theatricality of it was so quintessentially them that I almost had to laugh. Inside, the proposal itself was a work of art. The cover was bound in soft forest green leather, the kind you find on antique books, with the Marlowe players, a vision for the majestic, embossed in elegant gold script. My father's touch was all over it. He'd always believed that presentation was half the battle, that you could sell any idea if it was packaged beautifully enough. With a sense of dread and anticipation, I opened it. The paper was thick and creamy, the font a classic serif that spoke of tradition and gravitas. The first section was titled, Our Artistic Mandate. It was, I had to admit, breathtaking. My father, for all his flaws, could write. He wrote of the majestic not as a building, but as a living entity, a sleeping giant waiting to be reawakened. He wrote of a return to classic text-based drama, of the power of the spoken word to elevate the human spirit in an age of digital distraction. He quoted Shakespeare and Chekhov and Lorca. He painted a picture of a theater that would be a beacon of culture, a temple to truth and beauty. It was passionate, intelligent, and deeply moving. It was his soul poured onto the page. Reading it, a flicker of something long dormant sparked within me, a flicker of pride. This was the man who had read me bedtime stories in a dozen different character voices, the man who had taught me the heart-stopping power of a well-delivered line. This part was genuinely good. Then I turned the page to the section titled Operational Framework and Budget, and my heart sank. It was a catastrophe. It wasn't just bad, it was willfully ignorant. The numbers looked like they had been chosen at random, like artistic concepts rather than financial realities. He had budgeted a staggering amount for a gala opening night, complete with a string quartet, champagne fountains, and imported caviar, but had allocated a laughably small sum for actors' salaries. There was an entire page dedicated to the importance of custom-made velvet curtains, but not a single line item for liability insurance. The business plan was a fantasy. The community outreach section consisted of a single sentence. We will offer one matinee performance per production for local schools, schedules permitting. The revenue projections were based on selling out every single seat for every single performance, a feat no theater in the history of the world had ever achieved. It was arrogant. It was sloppy. It was a monument to their core belief that the grubby, practical details were beneath them, an annoyance to be dealt with by lesser beings. It was a perfect encapsulation of why I had to leave. They hadn't just ignored the rules of the application. They had treated them with contempt. The phone rang and the caller ID showed Mother. My breath caught in my throat. Eleonora rarely called me directly. Her silence was her primary weapon, and she wielded it with surgical precision. A direct call meant something was happening. I answered, my voice a carefully constructed wall of calm. "Hi, Mom." "Catherine," she began, her voice smooth and cool as marble. There was no small talk. Eleonora didn't do small talk. "I'm calling to share some wonderful news. Arthur has just finished our proposal for the majestic residency. It is, without exaggeration, a work of art. A masterpiece. He has poured his entire being into it. I'm sure it's very impressive," I said. "It is," she continued, a note of condescending pity creeping into her tone. "This mysterious benefactor, whoever they are, will surely see the genius in it. They are clearly a person of taste and vision to have saved the majestic in the first place. This isn't about business, Catherine. This is about legacy. It's our destiny." The way she said the word business made it sound like a disease. "I know you can't fully understand. Your world is so literal. It's all about cold, hard facts. And that's fine. We're all so proud of the life you've made for yourself. But this is different. This is about the soul." I gripped the edge of my desk, my knuckles turning white. Proud of the life I'd made? The life they relentlessly mocked and yet happily took money from? The condescension was suffocating. She was preemptively dismissing my entire existence as irrelevant to this grand, artistic quest. "I have to go, Mom," I said, my voice tight. "I have a meeting." "Of course, dear. Go on with your meetings." She hung up. I sat there, my hand trembling slightly. The old hurt, the familiar feeling of being fundamentally misunderstood and undervalued, was as fresh and raw as it had been at 18. They hadn't changed. They hadn't grown. They were still trapped in their own self-aggrandizing narrative, where they were the heroic artists and I was the soulless drone who just didn't get it. My mind raced. I was at a crossroads, holding their deeply flawed, artistically beautiful, financially ludicrous proposal in my hands. What was I supposed to do now? Option A was the simple, professional choice. Reject them. Their proposal was a non-starter. It failed to meet the most basic requirements of the application. It would be a clean, logical decision. It would be the final, crushing proof that their artistic arrogance was no match for the real world. A part of me, the angry, wounded part, craved that clean kill. Option B was to give it to them anyway. It was my theater, my money. I could do whatever I wanted. I could overlook the disastrous financials and award them the residency based on the beauty of their artistic vision. But that felt like a betrayal of myself. It would validate their entire worldview. It would prove them right, that the details don't matter, that passion is enough, that people like me are just there to clean up the mess. I would become the ultimate enabler, the patron saint of their dysfunction. Neither option felt right. One was too cruel, the other too weak. As I stared at the proposal, at the elegant script and the nonsensical numbers, a third option began to form in my mind. A plan that was more complicated, more dangerous, and far more revealing. It wasn't about a simple yes or no. It was about forcing a dialogue. I called Marcus. "I have an idea," I said, my voice firm. "But you're going to tell me it's playing with fire." "I probably will," he said warily. "Tell me anyway." An hour later, I was drafting an official letter on Althea Foundation letterhead. I spent the first 2 paragraphs praising their proposal in the most glowing terms possible. I used words I knew my father would love. Breathtaking vision, profound understanding of the dramatic arts, a compelling and deeply necessary artistic mandate. I wanted to hook them, to make them feel seen and celebrated on their own terms. Then, in the 3rd paragraph, the tone shifted. It became professional, inquisitive, and relentlessly specific. "The board was deeply moved by your artistic vision," I wrote. "However, to ensure the long-term viability of this significant investment in the community, we require clarification on several points in your operational framework." And then I dismantled them. Politely, of course. I questioned their revenue projections, asking for a more conservative model based on local market data. I asked for a detailed phase-by-phase community outreach plan with measurable success metrics. I requested a revised budget that reallocated funds from the gala opening to artist compensation and benefits. I asked about insurance, about marketing, about contingency plans. I threw every piece of their own corporate nonsense back at them, framed as a series of reasonable questions from a responsible foundation. I was using their contempt for my world as a weapon, forcing them to engage with it or forfeit the prize. I sent the letter via courier. The response came, as I knew it would, in the form of a furious phone call from my brother. He didn't even say hello. "Catherine, you will not believe the nerve of these people. This Althea Foundation. They sent us a letter, an inquisition. They love the art, they say, the soul of the project, but they want us to reevaluate our projected revenue streams based on demographic-specific absorption rates. It's gibberish. It's an insult to the entire creative process." I could hear my father yelling in the background, something about bureaucratic ghouls. "Dad is apoplectic," Leo continued, his voice dripping with righteous indignation. "He says art cannot be measured. It cannot be contained in a spreadsheet. Who are these people?" I let him vent, my face a mask of sympathy. Then he said the words I had been waiting for, the words that would spring the final phase of my trap. "Look, Cat," he said, his tone shifting from outrage to wheedling. "You do this stuff for a living. You understand their bizarre little language. What does it even mean? Can you just fix it for us? Please? Just write whatever corporate nonsense they want to hear, so we can get this over with and get back to the real work." There it was. The ultimate irony. They weren't just asking for a glance anymore. They weren't asking for advice. They were asking me, the soulless numbers cruncher, to do the very work they held in such contempt, so that they could win the grand prize that I, the soulless numbers cruncher, was secretly offering. The sheer, staggering hypocrisy of it stole my breath. "Of course, Leo," I said, my voice dangerously sweet. "Send it over. I'll see what I can do." I agreed to help, but not in the way they expected. I wasn't just going to fix their proposal. I was going to transform it. For 2 days, I locked myself in my office, ignoring calls and pushing aside my actual work. I took their document, their passionate, chaotic, beautiful mess, and I rebuilt it from the ground up. I kept their artistic vision, their soaring words about truth and beauty, completely intact. I treated that part with the reverence it deserved. But I ripped out their financial section and replaced it with a fortress. I built a 5-year budget that was realistic, ambitious, and utterly defensible. I created revenue models with best case, worst case, and most likely scenarios. I designed a 3-tiered community outreach program targeting underserved schools, senior centers, and local youth groups, complete with volunteer recruitment strategies and success metrics. I wrote a marketing plan that leveraged social media, local press, and strategic partnerships. I turned their 10 pages of dreamy prose and bad math into a 40-page, bulletproof business plan. It was the best work I had ever done, a perfect synthesis of my world and theirs. It was a document that proved unequivocally that art and commerce didn't have to be enemies. They could be powerful allies. When I was finished, I didn't send it to them. I sent it to Marcus. My instructions were simple. He was to call the Marlows. He was to tell them that the foundation had received their revised materials. I would let them believe I had submitted it on their behalf, and that the board was now extremely impressed. So impressed, in fact, that before a final decision could be made, the benefactor themselves wished to meet with them in person. "Where?" Marcus had asked, a glint in his eye. He knew what was coming. "Where else?" I'd replied. "The majestic. Center stage. Tomorrow at 2. I imagined the frantic, ecstatic energy that must have surged through the Marlowe household. The vindication. The arrogant certainty. Arthur would see this as his inevitable triumph. "Finally," he would have boomed. "A chance to speak artist to artist. To connect with a true patron. Once they meet me, once they hear my vision firsthand, these petty financial questions will evaporate like stage fog." Eleonora would be fussing over his attire. "Wear the black turtleneck, Arthur. You look like a true auteur." Leo would be speculating wildly. "It must be some old money eccentric. Someone who understands that great art requires patronage, not paperwork." They would be dressing for their coronation, completely oblivious to the fact they were walking towards an execution. The next day, I arrived at the theater an hour early. The restoration was complete, and it was more magnificent than I had ever imagined. The lobby gleamed, the brass fixtures polished to a high shine, the new crimson carpets muffling my footsteps. The air smelled of fresh paint, new wood, and the faint, sweet, dusty scent of a century of history. I walked through the empty hall, my footsteps echoing in the vast, silent space. I climbed the short steps onto the stage, the wood solid beneath my feet. I walked to the very center, the spot where my brother had stood in 100 daydreams, and stood under the soft glow of the single bare bulb of the ghost light. This was my space now. I had bought it. I had rebuilt it. This stage and everything it represented was my territory. At precisely 2 o'clock, I heard the grand lobby doors swing open, followed by the sound of voices, hushed and reverent. I watched from the shadows of the stage as my family entered. They stopped just inside the doors, their heads tilted back, awestruck by the soaring, vaulted ceiling and the restored gold leaf that shimmered in the dim light. They looked like pilgrims entering a cathedral. Incredible, my father breathed, his voice for once not a boom but a whisper of pure awe. It's just as I always dreamed it would be. They began to walk down the center aisle, their eyes scanning the rows of new velvet seats, the ornate plasterwork on the balcony railings. They were so consumed by the spectacle of the theater that they didn't see the lone figure standing on the stage. "Hello," Arthur called out, his voice regaining its familiar projective power as they neared the front. "We're the Marlowe players. We're here to meet the benefactor." I took a deep breath, held it for a beat, and then stepped forward into the full light of the ghost lamp. My simple, tailored black suit felt like armor. My voice, when I spoke, didn't need to be loud. The theater's perfect acoustics did the work for me, carrying the words to every corner of the silent hall. "Hello, Father. Mother. Leo." The effect was instantaneous and profound. 3 heads snapped towards me. 3 sets of eyes widened in unison. I saw the sequence of emotions play across their faces like a time-lapse film. Confusion, giving way to stunned disbelief, which then curdled into a dawning, sputtering horror. Leo was the first to speak, his voice a disbelieving squeak. "Kat, what are you doing here? Did you get a job here? Are you the assistant?" My mother, Eleonora, simply raised a hand to her mouth, her face a pale mask of shock. She was, for the first time in my memory, utterly speechless. My father's face was a thundercloud. The awe was gone, replaced by a dark, gathering rage. "This is a joke," he spat, the words sharp and ugly in the beautiful space. "A cruel, childish, and deeply unfunny joke. What is the meaning of this, Catherine?" I stood my ground. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let the tremor in my hands show. I met his glare with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "It's not a joke, Father. It's a balance sheet. It's a profit and loss statement. It's a significant capital investment in the future of this city's artistic community, and it needs to be a sound one." I gestured to a small table I had placed at the edge of the stage. On it were 2 documents. I picked up the first one, their beautiful leather-bound proposal. "This," I said, holding it up, "is a beautiful dream. It's poetry." Then I picked up the second document, the thick 40-page binder I had created. "And this," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound clarity, "is the version that makes the dream possible. This is the one with a viable business plan. The one with an outreach program that actually serves the community. The one with a budget that ensures this theater stays open for more than 6 months. This is the work you asked me to do. The corporate nonsense. The soulless numbers that you find so insulting." I let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "I bought this theater, and I restored it. I created the Althea Foundation. I wrote the application. I did it because I had to know. I had to know if, after all these years, you had learned anything. If you had grown at all. If you could finally see that the magic doesn't just happen on the stage. It happens in the planning, in the fundraising, in the spreadsheets. It happens in the work that keeps the lights on. The work you have spent my entire life dismissing. The work I do." My father's face was purple with rage. The humiliation was too much for him to bear. He was a king whose castle had just been revealed to be a film set, and the set dresser was the daughter he'd banished. "You did this to shame us," he finally exploded, his voice a raw roar that echoed off the velvet seats. "To flaunt your obscene money in our faces. You were never one of us. You have no soul, Catherine. No appreciation for the pain and sacrifice of a true artist. You think you can buy a legacy? You can buy a building, but you can't buy talent. You can't buy a soul." I looked at him, at this raging, wounded man, and I felt a strange and sudden calm. The old hurt was gone, burned away in the heat of his anger. All that was left was a quiet, sad clarity. I finally saw him for what he was, not a giant of the stage, but a small man, terrified of a world he refused to understand. "You're right, Father," I said, and his rant sputtered to a halt, surprised by my agreement. "I can't buy talent. And I can't buy a soul. That's why I'm not going to." I let my gaze drift past them, towards the main entrance at the back of the theater. As if on cue, the doors opened, and Marcus walked in. Standing beside him was a woman I recognized from her photo in the proposal. Maria Sanchez, the artistic director of the Downtown Repertory Theater. I brought my focus back to my stunned family. The Downtown Rep submitted a proposal that was brilliant in both its artistic vision and its practical execution. They respected the art, and they respected the process. They earned this. I took a deep breath. Your application is rejected. The silence that followed was more profound than any of my father's roars. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and drama out of the room. Arthur Marlowe, the great orator, stood with his mouth agape, sputtering like a car that had run out of gas. Eleonora, his silent partner, was now weeping openly, her silent tears tracing paths through her makeup. And Leo just looked lost. The charming, golden boy smirk he had worn his entire life had finally vanished, leaving behind a confused and frightened man. They looked small on the vast center aisle of the theater that was supposed to have been their kingdom. A quiet, professionally dressed security guard I had hired for the occasion materialized from the wings and walked calmly towards them. "Mr. and Mrs. Marlowe, Mr. Marlowe," he said, his voice polite but firm. "If you'll follow me." There was no argument. They turned, defeated, and allowed themselves to be escorted out of the theater like unruly patrons. I watched them go, a strange ache in my chest that wasn't triumph, but a hollow sort of grief for the family I had always wanted but never had. Maria Sanchez and Marcus walked down the aisle, their footsteps loud in the sudden emptiness. Maria's face was a canvas of shock and dawning, incredulous joy. I don't understand," she said, looking from me to the retreating forms of my family. "What just happened?" I managed a small, professional smile. "What just happened, Miss Sanchez, is that the Althea Foundation is thrilled to offer the 5-year majestic residency to the Downtown Repertory Theater. Your proposal was exemplary. Congratulations." She shook my outstretched hand, her grip firm, her eyes shining with tears of her own. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to us." "Oh, I think I do," I thought. After they had left, buzzing with plans and excitement, Marcus and I were alone in the great, silent hall. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just came and sat next to me in one of the plush velvet seats in the front row. "That," he said finally, "was even more intense than I expected. Are you okay?" The question undid me. The armor of composure I had worn all day cracked. I slumped in the chair, the adrenaline draining out of me, leaving me exhausted and empty. "I don't know what I am," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. "I honestly don't know what I thought would happen. I think a part of me thought they'd be proud, that they'd finally see me, that my father would look at what I built and say, 'Well done, Catherine.'" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Stupid, right? After everything." "Not stupid," Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's human. But what you did here today was honest. You built the stage, you offered them a script where they could be better, and they refused to learn the lines. You gave them a chance to meet you on your terms as an equal, and they couldn't do it. That's on them, Cat. Not you." His words were a bomb. In the days that followed, the story broke. At first, it was just the official announcement. The Downtown Rep had won the coveted residency. The arts community was overjoyed. They were a respected, beloved company that had been struggling for years in a cramped black box theater. Then the other shoe dropped. Someone in my family, probably Leo in a moment of bitter indiscretion, had leaked the identity of the benefactor. The headline on the city's main news blog was designed to sting. "Disowned finance daughter buys father's dream, gives it 2 rivals." The article painted me as a cold, vengeful corporate shark, using my fortune to enact a petty family revenge. My stomach clenched as I read it. They were trying to control the narrative, to cast me as the villain in their tragedy. But then I scrolled down to the comments section, and something amazing happened. Yes, there were some who agreed with the article's slant, but they were drowned out by a chorus of other voices. "Good for her," one person wrote. "The Marlowes have been insufferably arrogant for years." Another commented, "So the soulless banker is the only person in town smart enough to save the arts with a real business plan? I love it." And another, "Finally, the Downtown Rep gets the home it deserves. Thank you, Catherine Marlowe." I stared at my phone, a slow smile spreading across my face. I realized they didn't get to control the narrative after all. My actions, the thing I had built, were speaking for themselves. A week later, there was a knock on my apartment door. It was Leo. He looked awful. His hair was a mess, there were dark circles under his eyes, and his usual swagger was gone, replaced by a deep-seated weariness. "Can I come in?" he asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. He stood awkwardly in the center of my minimalist living room, a space so different from the cluttered, chaotic home we grew up in. I came to apologize," he stammered, not meeting my eyes. "We were wrong, Kat. About everything." He finally looked at me. After what happened, Marcus sent me a copy of the proposal you wrote. The full one. I read it. All 40 pages. It was brilliant. It actually made sense. It was a real plan. He shook his head. "We were just so blinded by the way we've always done things. By the way Dad taught us to see the world." It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. He apologized, but it was a clumsy, broken apology, still tangled up in the loss of the theater, the lost opportunity. But it was a start. I let him finish, and then I spoke, my voice calm and clear, setting the first real boundary of my life. "I appreciate you coming here and saying that, Leo. I really do. But this isn't about one mistake. This isn't just about the proposal. This has been my entire life. I can't just forget that overnight." I saw his face fall. "But," I continued, "that doesn't mean there's no way forward. The old dynamic, where I'm the fixer and the bank and you're the star, that's over. It has to be. But maybe we can start to build something new. If you can see me as just your sister and not a resource, then maybe we have a chance."